mean I'll see it.
There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in the deep woods at night. It isn't actually quiet. It's a thick, suffocating layer of noise, crickets, the wind in the pines, the shifting of dry brush that somehow makes you feel more alone than if you were in a sensory deprivation tank. I used to love that feeling. I grew up in a house tucked away on a 5-acre lot in the rural outskirts of the Pacific Northwest, where the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile hike through dense hemlock and fern. My bedroom was on the ground floor, and because the summer heat used to get trapped in the old wood framing, I always slept with the window slit open about 4 inches. I liked the cool air, the smell of damp earth, and the way the moonlight hit the floorboards. It was around 2 in the morning when the sound first pulled me out of a dead sleep. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was deliberate. It was a low, melodic whistling. The tune was instantly recognizable, which made it 10 times worse. It was the main theme from The Godfather. It was slow, rhythmic, and perfectly on key. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or that maybe a TV was on in another room, but as my head cleared, I realized the sound was coming from right outside. It felt like it was drifting in through that 4-inch gap in my window. I laid there for a long time, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to acknowledge that someone was standing in my backyard in the middle of the night, serenading my house with a movie theme. Eventually, the curiosity or the sheer terror-induced adrenaline forced me to sit up. I moved like a ghost, sliding off the mattress and crawling toward the window. I didn't open the blinds. I just reached up and twitched one of the slats with my index finger, just enough to get a sliver of a view. The moon was full, washing the entire backyard in a pale, sickly silver light. Standing right in the center of the lawn, maybe 20 feet from my window, was a man. He was tall, wearing a dark, oversized coat that looked like it had been dragged through a swamp, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face into a total, impenetrable shadow. He was standing perfectly still. His arms were at his sides, and he was just whistling. The tune was mournful. He wasn't looking at the door or the roof. He was staring directly at my bedroom window. The second the blinds moved, the whistling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music. It felt like the air in the room had turned to lead, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to draw a breath. I froze, my fingers still hooked on the blind. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 30 seconds. Then, the man did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He slowly raised a hand to the brim of his hat and tipped it, a mock polite gesture that felt like a threat. Then, he began to walk backward. He didn't turn around. He just backed away, step by step, keeping his hidden eyes locked on my window until he hit the tree line and the darkness swallowed him whole. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my room with a kitchen knife until the sun came up. When the light finally hit the porch, I worked up the courage to go outside. On the top step, right in front of the door, was a neat little pile of objects. They were hand-carved wooden whistles, 5 of them. They weren't just sticks with holes in them, they were intricately detailed, carved to look like tiny, screaming human faces. The wood was still slightly damp, and when I picked one up, the smell hit me. It didn't smell like cedar or pine. It smelled like raw meat left out in the sun, a thick, cloying, metallic stench that made me gag. I called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. No footprints on the hard, dry summer grass. No DNA on the whistles. They told me it was probably just a local eccentric or a prankster. I knew better. I stayed with a friend that night, and the night after. I only went back to the house during the day to pack my things. I was staying in a motel while I looked for an apartment in the city when I got a call from the guy who lived in the next house over, about half a mile down the road. He sounded weird. He asked me if I had seen anyone hanging around his place. I told him what happened to me, and there was this long, jagged pause on the other end of the line. He told me that he had woken up to the sound of someone whistling in his backyard the night before. He said the tune was different this time. It was a lullaby. He had gone outside with a flashlight to scare the guy off, but he didn't find anyone. All he found was a trail of dark, viscous fluid leading from his back porch into the woods. He followed the trail a little way, thinking a coyote had gotten a rabbit or something. He found a stump about 50 yards into the trees. Sitting on the stump was another carving. This one wasn't a whistle. It was a larger piece of wood, maybe the size of a football, carved into a perfect replica of a human heart. He said the detail was sickening, the valves, the veins, everything was there. And it wasn't painted red. It was soaked in it. He said the wood was dripping with something thick and dark that smelled like a slaughterhouse floor. The police went out there and found the carving, but again, nothing. They couldn't even confirm the blood was human because of the way it had soaked into the porous wood, though the lab tech told my neighbor it was consistent with mammalian biology. That was the last straw for me. I broke my lease, sold what I couldn't carry, and moved into a high-rise apartment in the center of the city. I have triple deadbolts on the door, and I'm on the 12th floor. I thought I was safe. 6 months went by. I started to relax. I stopped checking under my bed and stopped jumping at every little noise in the hallway. Then, 2 days ago, I came home from work and found a small, brown paper package sitting on my welcome mat. There was no return address. No stamps. Just my name written in cramped, shaky handwriting. My stomach dropped. I took it inside and sat it on my kitchen table, staring at it for an hour before I got the nerve to open it. Inside was a single wooden whistle carved from a dark, stained wood. This one was shaped like a tiny, exquisite bird with its wings clipped. But that wasn't what made me drop the box. Inside the box, tucked under the whistle, was a Polaroid photo. It was a shot of me taken from behind while I was standing at the window of my new apartment looking out at the city lights. The photo had been taken from the roof of the building across the street. And on the back of the photo, written in that same cramped hand, were the words, "I miss the music." I haven't gone back to that apartment. I'm writing this from a library computer on the other side of the state. I don't have a permanent address anymore. I sleep in my car, usually in well-lit gas station parking lots. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those 3 slow, melodic notes of the Godfather theme. I know he's out there, somewhere in the dark, carving something new. I can still smell that thick, raw stench of the wood, and I know that the next gift he leaves won't be made of timber. It will be something much more visceral. The worst part is that I've started to notice something when I'm driving at night. Sometimes, in the rearview mirror, I'll see a pair of headlights that stay exactly 3 cars behind me for miles. And when I pull over, those headlights disappear into a side street or a dark driveway. I don't know how he found me, or how he keeps finding me. But last night, while I was parked under a street lamp trying to get some sleep, I heard it. It was faint, almost buried by the sound of the rain hitting the roof of the car. A low, steady whistle. It wasn't a movie theme this time. It was the same lullaby my neighbor described. It was soft, almost sweet, like something a mother would sing to a child. I didn't look out the window. I didn't turn on the lights. I just started the engine and drove until the sun came up. My hands were vibrating against the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from a deep, primal realization that there is no distance far enough. He isn't just following me. He's waiting for me to get tired. And I am so tired.
Next story.
The stretch of highway between my hometown and the city where I work is one of those places that feels like it shouldn't exist after midnight. It's mostly dense pine forest and old, crumbling stone walls that look like they're trying to crawl back into the earth. There isn't a single street lamp for a good 15 miles, just the narrow beam of your own headlights and the feeling that the darkness is pressing against the glass, trying to find a way inside. I was making that drive late, probably a bit past 1 in the morning, just trying to get home so I could pass out before my shift the next day. The road was slick from a light drizzle, reflecting the blackness of the sky, and I was keeping a steady pace of about 40 miles per hour because the deer out there are suicidal. I had the radio turned low, just some mindless talk show to keep the silence from becoming too suffocating, when I saw something white on the shoulder of the road about 100 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was a discarded plastic bag or maybe a piece of a fallen sign. But as I got closer, the shape resolved into a person. They were standing perfectly still, right on the edge of the asphalt, wearing what looked like a bright white tracksuit or maybe medical scrubs. It was so clean, so blindingly pale against the mud and the dark trees that it felt wrong. People don't just stand in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night wearing pristine white clothes. I slowed down slightly, my heart doing a nervous little flutter against my ribs. I didn't want to hit them, but I also didn't want to stop. As my headlights swept over them, I realized they weren't looking at the road. They were staring straight ahead into the trees, their back to me. They were tall, way too tall, with limbs that seemed a bit too long for their frame. I didn't see a face, just the back of a bald, pale head. I held my breath as I passed, my eyes locked on them, waiting for a thumb to go up for a hitchhike or for them to turn around. They didn't move an inch. The second I was past them, I looked in my rearview mirror. I just wanted to make sure they weren't going to step out into the lane behind me. For a second, there was nothing but the red glow of my taillights hitting the mist. Then, the person in white didn't just move, they collapsed. It wasn't a fall, though. It was a deliberate, synchronized drop onto all fours, like a dog spotting a rabbit. Before I could even process what I was seeing, they started to move. They weren't running like a human on all fours. They were sprinting with a rhythmic, insect-like speed, their elbows and knees splaying out at impossible angles. Every time their hands hit the pavement, I could feel a tiny vibration through the frame of my car. I was going 40, and they were gaining on me. I watched in the mirror, paralyzed by a sickening, thick dread as that white shape ate up the distance between us. Their head was tucked low, swinging side to side with every stride, and the way they moved was so fluid, so predatory, that it made my stomach turn over. I slammed my foot onto the gas. The engine roared, and the needle climbed to 50, then 60. I looked back, expecting to see them fading into the distance, but they were right there, maybe 10 feet from my bumper. In the dim red glow of my brakes, I could see their hands. They weren't wearing gloves. Their skin was the color of a fish's belly, and their fingers were elongated, ending in dark, jagged shapes that scraped against the road. The terror that hit me wasn't the kind you get from a jump scare. It was a deep, visceral realization that I was being hunted by something that didn't follow the rules of anatomy. I pushed the car to 70, the steering wheel vibrating under my white-knuckled grip. The tires screamed as I hit a slight curve, and for a moment, I thought I was going to slide off into the trees, which would have been a death sentence. That's when it happened. A sound tore through the interior of the car, even over the sound of the wind and the engine. It wasn't a human scream. It was high-pitched, piercing, and metallic, sounding exactly like a tea kettle left on a blazing stove for too long. It was a screech of pure, frantic hunger that seemed to vibrate the very glass of my windshield. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. I just focused on the road, my eyes wide and stinging because I was too afraid to blink. I pushed the car until the needle was hovering near 85, the highest I've ever pushed that old sedan. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, the white shape started to recede. It didn't slow down, it just seemed to veer off, darting into the tree line with a final, blurred motion that no living person should be able to pull off. I didn't slow down until I saw the fluorescent lights of a 24-hour gas station a few miles down the road. I pulled in so hard the tires chirped, stopping right under the brightest light in the lot. I sat there for a long time, just shaking, my chest feeling like it was being crushed by a lead weight. My breath was coming in ragged, shallow gasps, and I could taste the sour tang of bile in the back of my throat. The attendant was inside, staring at me through the window like I was a lunatic. I probably looked like one. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to get out of the car. I needed to see. I needed to know if I had imagined the whole thing, if maybe it was just a trick of the light and a stray dog. I walked to the back of my car, my legs feeling like jelly. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the smell of the woods or the rain. It was a sharp, metallic stench, like a butcher shop that hadn't been cleaned in a week, a cloying, iron-rich scent that seemed to stick to the back of my throat. Then I saw the trunk. There, smeared across the dark paint and thick, drying mud and something darker, were 4 handprints. They weren't normal handprints. The palms were narrow, and the fingers were nearly 8 inches long, ending in deep gouges where the paint had been scraped down to the bare metal. They were positioned right on the edge of the trunk lid, as if something had been trying to find a grip to pull itself up while I was driving. I didn't go home that night. I drove to a motel 2 towns over, somewhere with a gated lot and plenty of security cameras. I sat in the room with the lights on, watching the door, listening to every creak of the floorboards. I've had the car washed 3 times since then, but if you look closely at the trunk, you can still see the outlines of those fingers. They aren't just scratches, they're indentations, as if whatever was chasing me had enough strength to dent the steel with its bare hands. I don't take the back road anymore. I don't care if the highway takes an extra hour. Because every time I look in my rearview mirror now, even in broad daylight, I expect to see a flash of white dropping down onto the pavement behind me. I keep thinking about that sound, that tea kettle screech. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like something that was frustrated, like it had been so close to catching me, and it knew exactly what I tasted like before I even got away. The worst part isn't the memory of the chase, though. It's the realization that if I had been going just 5 miles an hour slower, or if I had hit a pothole, those handprints wouldn't be on the trunk. They'd be on me.
Next story.
I was living in this old, narrow townhouse in a part of the city that felt like it was constantly being reclaimed by the damp. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's microwave beep, but thick enough that I felt entirely alone when the sun went down. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, right at the end of a hallway that felt a little too long for the actual dimensions of the house. I had this habit, almost a ritual, of locking my bedroom door with the deadbolt I'd installed myself. It wasn't a neighborhood thing, it was just a me thing. I liked the feeling of being sealed in, tucked away from the rest of the world while I slept. Everything changed on a night that felt completely ordinary. I'd fallen asleep watching some mindless show on my laptop, the screen eventually timing out and leaving me in total darkness. I woke up at what I later realized was exactly 3 a.m., not because of a noise, but because the air in the room had shifted. It was freezing. Not just a draft, but a deep, biting chill that felt like it had been pulled straight from a freezer. My first thought was that I must have left the window open, but I never opened that window in the winter. It's painted shut. I reached out across the nightstand, fumbling for my phone to get some light. The glow of the screen was blinding for a second, but as my eyes adjusted, the light spilled past my hand and hit the wall where my bedroom door should have been closed. It wasn't closed. The door was standing wide open, the deadbolt still extended, mocking me. I knew I had turned that lock. I felt the click in my palm before I went to bed. I sat up, my heart doing this weird, erratic thumping against my ribs that I could feel in the back of my throat. I looked into the dark hallway. At first, I didn't see anything, just the familiar shadows of the banister and the linen closet. But then, a figure stepped into the frame of the doorway. He wasn't a shadow or a ghost. He was a man. He was wearing a grease-stained hoodie and jeans that looked like they'd been dragged through a swamp. He was thin, unnervingly thin, with skin that looked like wet parchment stretched over a skull. He didn't look scared to be caught. He didn't look like he was in a hurry. He was standing there, just a few feet from the end of my bed, holding my spare set of car keys. I'd kept those keys in a ceramic bowl by the front door downstairs. He began to jiggle them, a rhythmic, metal-on-metal sound that felt like it was vibrating inside my teeth. He watched me with these wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to catch the light from my phone. He wasn't even breathing hard. He just stood there, tilting his head to the side, and then he whispered, "Not tonight, then." The voice was raspy, like someone who hadn't used their vocal cords in a month. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something imitating a human. Before I could even find my voice to scream, he turned around and walked down the hallway. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, like he lived there and I was the guest. I heard the front door click shut with a soft, final thud. I didn't move for an hour. I stayed pinned to that bed, staring at the empty doorway, convinced that if I blinked, he'd be standing over me. When the police finally arrived, they didn't find much at first. There was no sign of forced entry on the front door or the windows. The officer looked at me like I was having some kind of mental breakdown, right up until he saw the mud on the hallway carpet. It was thick, black sludge that smelled like stagnant water and something decaying, not the sharp, metallic tang of blood, but the thick, cloying stench of meat that's been left out in the sun for far too long. It was a smell that seemed to coat the inside of your nose and stay there. They did a sweep of the house, and that's when they found the access panel in the back of the pantry. I always assumed it was just for the plumbing. It led down into a crawl space under the floorboards of the living room. When the forensic team went down there, they found a nest. That's the only way to describe it. He brought down some of my old gym clothes to make a bed. There were empty food wrappers, some of them months old, and a stack of my mail that I thought had been lost in the post. But the worst part wasn't the nest. It was the viewing ports. He had drilled small, neat holes through the floorboards in several spots. One was directly under the sofa where I sat every night to eat dinner. Another was in the corner of the kitchen. And there was one more, perfectly centered under the spot where I stood every morning to brush my teeth. The police technician told me that based on the amount of waste and the state of the items down there, he'd been living under me for at least 3 weeks. For 21 days, I had been walking around, sleeping, and living my life while this man was inches beneath my feet. He'd been listening to my conversations, learning my schedule, and waiting. He knew when I went to bed, when I showered, and when I was most vulnerable. The deadbolt on my bedroom door didn't matter because he'd probably been inside the room a dozen times while I was at work, figuring out how to bypass it, or perhaps he had already been in the room, hiding in the closet, waiting for me to fall asleep so he could unlock it from the inside. The detective told me that they found a small notebook in the crawl space. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. It had dates and times, all centered around my movements. There were notes about what I wore, what I ate, and how long I slept. But the last entry, dated the night I woke up, was what broke me. It just said, "She's starting to notice the smell. Move closer." I moved out that same day. I didn't even pack most of my things. I just took what I could fit in my car and left. I stayed at a hotel for a week, and then I found an apartment on the 10th floor of a high-rise. I thought the height would make me feel safe. I thought having neighbors on all sides and a concrete floor would stop the paranoia. But it hasn't. Now, every time I hear a creak in the floorboards or a soft thud from the apartment above me, I freeze. I've started weighing myself every morning, obsessed with the idea that if someone else is in the house, I'll hear the floor complain under the extra mass. The worst part is the keys. I can't stand the sound of keys jingling. It sends this electric jolt of pure terror through my spine. I keep thinking about those wide, unblinking eyes and that raspy whisper. Not tonight, then. It implies there was a plan. It implies that he wasn't there to steal my car or my electronics. He was there for something else, something that required me to be asleep, something that he had been practicing for while huddled in the dark under my feet. They never caught him. They found his fingerprints all over the crawl space and on the underside of my floorboards, but he wasn't in any database. He was a ghost in the system, a predator who knew exactly how to blend into the background of a normal life. Sometimes, when it's very quiet in my new place, I'll lie on the floor with my ear pressed against the hardwood. I know it's crazy. I know there's nothing but solid concrete and steel under me now. But I still listen, straining to hear the sound of a labored breath or the faint, metallic jingle of a spare set of keys. I don't think I'll ever feel truly alone again. Every time I walk into a room, I find myself looking at the corners of the ceiling, the gaps under the doors, and the vents in the walls. I find myself wondering if the person I pass on the street, the one who gives me a slightly too long look, is the one who knows what my bedroom looks like in the dark. I wonder if he's found a new floor to hide under, a new person to watch through a tiny, drilled hole. Because he's still out there, and he still has my keys. I keep the lights on now. All of them. All night. It doesn't help with the dreams, but at least when I wake up at 3 a.m., I can see the door is still locked. For now.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.